Welcome back to the NFPT podcast, where we make you feel confident walking into your CPT exam. I'm your host, Erin Mahoney, General Manager of NFPT, and today we are talking about circumference measurements. Now, circumference measurements are very straightforward, not too complicated, which is great when you're studying, but you still have things that you need to know about circumference measurements for test day. So let's dive in. We've actually got quite a bit to cover. The first thing is circumference measurements fall under the category of fitness assessments, which is part of the testing domain of program development and implementation. So you'll want to be doing circumference measurements with your client, and this is just simply taking a tape measure, something that's flexible, non-elastic, and you'll be measuring different points around the client's body. Now, the most common places to do your circumference measurements include the waist, the hips, the chest, the upper arm, the thigh, and the calf. So know those for test day. And then what you'll also want to know with each one of those is the approximate location of how you would measure each one of those circumference points. So let's start with the waist. For waist measurements, you're going to be taking the circumference at the narrowest part of the torso. This is typically above the navel and below the rib cage. This is typically above the navel and below the rib cage, and it's a top indicator of visceral fat and metabolic risk. You're also going to be assessing the hips. So for this one, you're going to have your client stand with their feet together, and you're going to take the widest part around the buttocks. And this is a measurement that's required for waist to hip ratio measurement, which is a great measurement that we're going to talk about here shortly. And it's also helpful for tracking lower body composition changes. Then we've got the chest. So circumference measurements for the chest is you are going to be taking this directly across the nipple line at the normal end of an exhale. Now, typically what you would want to do to avoid uncomfortable situations or put yourself at risk is you would have the client or ask the client to place the tape measure across their nipple line. And then you would grab the tape, they would hand the tape measure to you, and then you would collect it in the back. So that will help ease any comfortability issues that might pop up. Next up, we have the arm, the upper arm. So this is going to be measured at the midpoint between the shoulder and the elbow. Then you've got the thigh. For the thigh, you're also going to be measuring this at a midpoint. It's between the hip crease and the top of the knee. Now, for both the thigh and the arm, a great way to do this to avoid as much inconsistency as possible is to actually measure where that midpoint is. So you would measure, for example, with the arm, the entire length between the shoulder and the elbow, mark that halfway point with a pen, let's say, and then that is where you would conduct your circumference measurement. Same thing with the thigh. That helps to reduce any kind of variation from one month to the next, or even from trainer to trainer. And then lastly, you'll want to be getting the circumference of the client's calf or lower leg. And this is the largest part of their lower leg when they are relaxed, standing with their weight evenly distributed between their feet. Now, let's talk a little bit more about waist to hip ratio. So all waist to hip ratio is circumference measurements. So you're just taking the measurement of the waist and you're dividing that number by the hips. And this is really important because waist to hip ratio is an indication of a client's risk for metabolic disease. And so before we go into further that, let's talk a little bit more about where they might fall on the risk categories. So because men and women are shaped differently, they have different markers. So for the men, they are at low risk if they're less than 0.9 for their waist to hip ratio. They're at moderate risk if they're at 0.9 to 0.99, and they're at high risk if they're anything over 1.0. Now, women, on the other hand, they are low risk if they are less than 0.8, moderate risk at 0.8 to 0.4, and high risk at 0.85 and anything over that. And here is why certified personal trainers use this. Like I said, it is an indication of visceral fat. So for example, a client with an apple-shaped body type is going to distribute their fat in different places than somebody with a pear-shaped body type. And that apple-shaped body type is going to carry higher cardiometabolic risk than the client with the pear-shaped. So even though those clients might have the same body fat percentage, if that body or if that fat is distributed towards the center of their body, they have higher risk factors. The other reason why this is really helpful for certified personal trainers is because of the minimal amount of equipment that's needed. All you need is tape measure. So it works in any gym, at any session, with any client. It's a great tool to use. And it also tracks beyond the scale. So a client's body weight might be fluctuating throughout the month, but their circumference measurements aren't going to have those same types of fluctuation. And clients, especially when they're trying to lose body fat, they will be losing inches all over. So you'll want to be taking measurements, not just at the waist and the hip, but everywhere, because it really helps with the motivation levels and lets them see a very clear view of how far they've come. And then, of course, you pair that with other data like their resting heart rate, their body mass index, and skin fold caliper testing to get a nice full fitness assessment of where that client started and where they are progressing to. Now, when you're doing circumference measurements, and you'll want to know this for test day, make sure that you follow some best practices. So here are best practices for doing circumference measurements. Number one, use the same tape measure and apply the same tension every single time, as much as you possibly can. Number two, mark your landmarks. So sometimes with clients, when there was no visible narrow part of the waist, I would just, and it's recommended to, just use the navel as the landmark, or find other anatomical landmarks, because that allows you to make sure that you're measuring the same site every single time. Another way you can improve accuracy is by measuring twice, and then if there's a discrepancy, averaging those two measurements. Also, consider standardizing the conditions. So for example, have your client do these assessments, or do these assessments on your clients at the same time of day with the same type of hydration and minimal clothing. So you don't really want to do it right after a workout or right after they just ate, which is pretty standard because you can just do it right when they come in to see you. You always want to make sure that the tape is horizontal, so it might slip a little bit, and that will add inches, which you don't want to do. So the tape measure should always be parallel to the floor and flush against the skin all the way around. No twists, no slack. And then lastly, document everything. So record the site, the value, the date, the conditions, and initial it. And then you're going to want to reassess this every 4 to 6 weeks to look at how their data is trending. All right, that was it. Circumference measurements, not so bad. And that is what makes NFPT different, is that CPT success should be a straightforward path. It should not be complicated. And if you haven't already, you should definitely enroll in an NFPT CPT package today. But if you've already enrolled in another CPT, then you should absolutely check out our recorded exam prep series, because that works to supplement any other CPT program and gives you valuable tips for CPT test day. All right, that's it. Thank you for joining. Enjoy your day, stay well, and keep moving.